Kate Falcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. It's time for our Saturday book, and this week we're continuing with Frame Up by Andy Edmonds, The Untold Story of Roscoe Arbuckle. This is video number 3 in this book, so you'll want to catch up to understand what's going on. I hope people agree with me. I always like it when people agree with me, but I hope people agree with me about this book. I found the time period, the historical part, the glimpse of early Hollywood was really interesting. I'm not very drawn into modern actors' problems, but there was something about the time period between 1900 and about 1935, where Hollywood was a very intriguing place. The actors and actresses were an interesting bunch too. Lots of fascinating stories. Meantime, Roscoe Arbuckle was so talented and a really nice person. He had personal issues, but he was a good friend. He was very generous. He was very kind. He just drink too much and get a little weird sometimes. But his childhood was so troublesome, so problematic, traumatic. Anyway, in this true story, he is at the pinnacle of success when he's accused of a terrible crime. And this is a story of a fall from grace that was completely unnecessary. It was a frame up. There apparently now is proof, which we'll talk about, but he was framed. He was framed for political reasons and because of the studio and their desire to keep control and not give away money, the usual story. Very sad. And it eventually led to his demise, as you'll find out. It's no secret. I mean, this is a long time ago. This is over 100 years ago. So we're on chapter 8, and we're in 1914. Something they don't talk about in this book very much, if I remember correctly, is the Spanish flu. So keep that in the back of your mind, that this was the lead up to that. And it was right at the beginning of World War I in Europe, and the United States eventually, of course, would enter that war. There was a lot going on in the background of these early silent films. So they were an especially important novelty and escape. So let's get to chapter 18, 1914. Charlie Chaplin was rising in popularity, but Roscoe Arbuckle was by far the more popular globally, better paid. Anyway, he was demanding more control of his films and more money. He had a huge ego. He was known for his huge ego. And there was a kind of a ego contest going on between the two of them. In negotiations, he managed to get himself $750, and it was brought up by Senate to $1,400. Senate hired guards to keep agents from rival studios away so they wouldn't lure Chaplin to go work for them, because the contracts were not finalized yet. They were still under negotiation, and he was afraid somebody else would make a better offer, because Chaplin was all about the money and also wanted more creative freedom. But one of the agents from another studio, did manage to sneak into the Senate lot dressed as a cowboy. He was from the SNA studios, and he offered Chaplin $1,250 and full control. Chaplin said, okay, and quit Senate and Keystones on the spot. Senate said it was the worst mistake he ever made professionally, was not offering Chaplin whatever he wanted. More tragic was for Sennett was his 7-year affair with Mabel Normand. They had a very odd relationship. His mother didn't approve. She believed Mabel was a hussy and told Mabel to stay away from her son. And Mabel was enraged. Now, keep in mind, Sennett is kind of an unsavory character about, like personal hygiene and appearance and condition of his clothes. It's interesting because Mabel Normand was an up-and-coming star. But she went to him and she gave him an ultimatum. She said, you proposed to me or that's that. But then she caught Sennett with one of her best friends, Mae Bush, at his house. Somebody tipped her off. Now, this is what I mean by the weird things that happened in early Hollywood. Here they are. They've had this 7-year affair. She's lost her patience. I don't know why she wanted to take on this woman who hated her as a mother-in-law, but I guess, So she wanted him to make her honest woman. So she gave him this ultimatum, and shortly thereafter, she got a tip. She went to his house. She caught him in flagrante with Mae Bush. So what ensued was fodder for a black and white silent film. Mabel, she got into a screaming match with Mae Bush. Objects were thrown. Mabel got knocked out by a vase that hit her in the head. She woke up hours later at home. She had her inside the home. She had a friend waiting outside the car who saw Mabel staggering out, bleeding. So I think the point the book was making is she really didn't come to her full senses. So she was stunned and bleeding, and her friend drove her home. And the friend called Minta and Roscoe, and they called the doctors. So there's this little round robin of panicked phone calls. Keep in mind, the phone was a huge novelty. They called the doctor. The doctor said, go to the emergency room. So they ended up doing a brain surgery on her. She had a subdural hematoma, bleeding under the skull from this vase, and a huge blood clot that had to be taken out. According to Adela Rogers St. John, the writer, days after her release, that can't be right. I don't think I wrote this down right. It can't be right. Let me double check. I don't want to tell you the wrong thing. Oh, okay. I didn't want to use a particular word, and so I didn't even write it down because I was afraid I'd say it out loud. So I left the verb sort of out of here, the descriptive word out. Yeah, I know. I'm trying to figure out how to say this without getting in trouble with YouTube. So Mabel was still not in her right senses from this brain surgery and the damage and the injury to her head. And she reached the end of her rope and decided to make that happen in water. I think you know what I mean. And needless to say, the 7-year love affair was over. After 3 months at home, she returned to the Keystone lot. And it was really obvious to everybody that the head injury had affected her mind. This is a very sad story. I think today there would have probably been some lawsuits about this. Anyway, she was still really hurt and upset with Sennett, and she avoided him. She starred in Mickey, which was a big success, but she was never the same. She was never quite right, and they don't really have anything specific much to say what that means, but befuddled, confused. Well, there is actually one small story. Sennett told the papers that would be no more Fatty and Mabel movies. Um, because and then this is terrible, and this really led to the tragedy that happened later. Senate did not want to have journalists ask questions and find out that he'd had an affair with her, that she'd had a fight with Mae Bush, that she'd had brain surgery as a result. She didn't want any of that in papers. So he told journalists she did get hurt, but she got hurt doing a stunt filming with Roscoe Arbuckle, and put the blame on Arbuckle. And he ordered them on threat of losing their jobs to go along with the lie. So this really set up a little foundational evidence in people's minds. It was absolutely a lie. There was an oddly titled article in Photoplay magazine in April of 1916 called "Why Aren't We Killed?" And it explains how the stunt people in the Keystone movie place don't get hurt, or did not get hurt, doing all these crazy stunts. So they talked about how that hefty Arbuckle missed his mark on several stunts, calling for death-defying retakes, how his girth broke props, and the only reason he was not injured was because of his unusual athletic prowess. And it's true, he was extremely agile and nimble, incredible. Arbuckle said, "I'm the only man my size and weight the New York Life Insurance Company will issue a policy to. I'm 5 feet 7 inches tall. I weigh 385 pounds, which is 40% more than the law allows. But I passed every physical test they put up to me. When you're in shape, you won't get hurt." Mabel was asked the same question, why she didn't get hurt or killed doing stunt work, especially with Arbuckle. And she said, "Why haven't I been killed?" "Well, I have. I guess you don't read the Los Angeles papers, but it wasn't permanent." She was referring to this accident, and they said, well, with the vase that met her head when she was having the fight, she didn't mention that part. They asked what happened. She said, "Roscoe sat on my head by mistake. I was unconscious for 12 days and laid up for 3 months. So there you have it. They set him up without realizing that they fertilized the soil for the situation that happened later. Okay. Let's see. So Mabel then signed a 5-year contract with Goldwyn. Her behavior became more and more bizarre. Once in the middle of a production, she took off for Paris and gave no warning to anybody. She spent money wildly. This sounds like she's going through manic episodes. She spent a lot of money on coke. That could not have helped. Goldwyn pursued her, and so did Senate. Pursued her in, that kind of way, and she rebuffed them. In 1922, she was implicated in the murder of William Desmond Taylor, a famous director who was shot in his home in Hollywood. And we may have to talk about that case because it's never been solved. She was innocent. Her career ended from a combination of the head injury, and she got TB. She died in 1930. She was only 35 years old, but she left all of her money from her famous movies to Los Angeles orphanages. After Chaplin left Senate, Roscoe was at the top. He got $450 a week and full control of his movies. Senate called him his number one right-hand man, and he actually consulted him creatively on a lot of the work. His fatty comedies were two-reelers. They were very popular. He hated the name. I don't like to use it. For him, cross-dressing became a trademark in his movies. He was famous for it. Minta is in many of them, and their pit bull, Luke, who got $150 a week. He was a great stunt dog, and I looked him up. There are some shorts on YouTube you can watch. They're on the regular YouTube videos. They are short, black and white, not in the modern sense, in the old-fashioned sense. And he did his own stunts, Luke, the stunt dog. He had been given to Minta by the director, Lucas, director of these shorts, to bribe her to do dangerous stunts. Roscoe was very popular. He was in high demand for interviews and appearances. Studio press releases gave out his biographical information was mostly lies, lots of slurs about his size. His drinking was treated as a joke. Alcoholism was kind of a laughing matter in those days, and it gave him permission. It got bad. The prevailing social attitude about this was men drank a lot. Drugs were used in high amounts by the stars, and alcoholics were funny, something to laugh at. When he drank with friends, he got more gregarious. When he drank alone, he got hostile. And he grew physically distant from Minta. He became like a guest in his own house. Minta's mother babied him, and she took his side against her daughter, which really didn't help the marriage very much. Keystone moved studios to New Jersey. Roscoe and Minta they went with them 6 months later, and he returned to Los Angeles without Minta. He preferred to be out there. Chapter 9. Now, this is before Hollywood was such a big deal. And, they moved for the weather, but they still made a lot of movies in the East. He was mobbed at the train station to New Jersey, and they actually slept in separate train compartments when they took the train. Roscoe was usually on good terms with reporters. It upset him when they focused on violence and accidents on the set. He was told by Senate to sugarcoat everything, to downplay the dangers of the stunts. When they called him fatty, he would say, "I have a name, you know." He was obsessed with his work, but he had nightmares that the fans would turn against him, like a premonition. I mean, real bad nightmares. He and Caruso were big fans of each other, and they became friends. Caruso tried to get him to leave the movies to be a singer because he thought that he had a fabulous voice. Roscoe actually considered it. He was getting a third of what Charlie Chaplin did, but he brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he needed to don't worry, he becomes like the biggest paid star, but this is during a period of time when he was underappreciated. He was bombarded with offers from other studios. Senate didn't know what he had. In 1916, the early stars were kept as anonymous. Their names did not necessarily appear on the credits on movies. For example, Mary Pickford, she was listed as the girl with the curls, no name. She's just the girl with the curls. She played this part. The main stars at the time were Pickford and Fairbanks. And they were married at some point. I don't know if they were married exactly at this point or, later or when. And then Chaplin and Arbuckle. Mary Pickford played demure little kind of mid-age adolescent. She always looked like she was about 15. She was petite, and she always had these long golden ringlets. Fairbanks did a lot of swashbuckling. He was always swinging from vines with a sword. And of course, then Chaplin and Arbuckle were the comedians. But Roscoe got paid 2/3 less. He was too much of a pushover. He didn't fight for it. But he got an agent named Max Hart. He felt disloyal, he told him, by doing that. But Max Hart said there's no such thing as loyalty in this or any other business. This was a reality that Roscoe just had to accept. He says he felt like a troublemaker. And Hart said, remember, Roscoe, there's no such thing as loyalty in this or any other business. When they need you, you hold the aces. When they don't, there's nothing you can do. You have to make the best deal when you're holding the aces. So we got him a deal with Senate for $2,000 a week, including positions, jobs for Minta and his nephew, Al St. John. He was wooed by Lou Anger, and he did make one more Fatty and Mabel short reels. He took a month tour with Minta of the Orient, you know, Asia. And this was a professional triumph for him, but it was a personal disaster. He discovered while he was out there, you know, China and Southeast Asia, everywhere he went, he discovered that he was an international star. And he discovered that the stage was more stressful than making movies. It was easier to make movies. And because they were appearing on the stage while they traveled, he took the stress out on Minta, and he realized finally how famous he really was. Adolf Zucker, that's a name you should remember, was a producer and what's called a raider for Famous Players Lasky. Famous Players Lasky became Paramount. He was ruthless. He stole stars. He broke up Triangle, which was another studio. Aitken, Griffith, Ince, and Sennett. Zucker was feared. He was hated. He was the richest and most powerful of all of the producers. He built a string of theaters across the country, and he did it because some movies protested his prices, his policies, and threatened to boycott his films, so he built his own theaters. He just, you know, more money than sense, right? He lured top stars with promises of untold riches and control of their own films. He signed Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, William S. Hart. I believe he was a cowboy, wore a white hat, I think. Dorothy and Lillian Gish, two sisters who played young damsels in distress. Very, very popular. And interestingly enough, their great granddaughter, direct descendant, had one of the main roles in the movie Mystic Pizza. You might want to check that out. Late 80s, early 90s. Then somebody called Marguerite Clark, Arbuckle's friend Hobart Bosworth, and the boy who would soon soar to the heights of stardom only to crash at Zucker's hands, Wallace Reed, a star I'm fascinated with. This is such a sad story. Zucker had made a bid at Chaplin, but he refused to pay Chaplin's demand of $1 million a year. Pickford eventually left when she was lured away by the newly formed First National Pictures, which took direct aim at Zucker's Paramount. And they paid Chaplin $1.75 million a year, and they offered Pickford even more. Now Zucker was out to get Roscoe Arbuckle signed with him, and Lou Anger was the guy who's going to do it for him. Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and Charlie Chaplin. I feel like there was another member, maybe D.W. Griffith. They united after this and formed United Artists. And then they were off to the races in charge of their own lives. And they were huge. So Anger was working for Zucker. He was Zucker's front man, and he was the trap that snared Roscoe. Schenck hired Anger, and Schenck had to deal with Zucker. So this is sort of a Zucker, Schenck, Anger. Zucker and Schenck were kind of on a par, but Schenck did things with and for Zucker. And then Lou Anger was their hatchet guy, the guy that they sent to do all their hard work, you know, to negotiate with people. So they offered Roscoe complete artistic control, $250,000 a year with other perks and bonuses for that were the equivalent of another million a year. But this was still less than Chaplin had been offered. And he wouldn't get all of it because a percentage would have to go to Schenck and Anger. So Roscoe went behind Hart, Sennett, Minta, and everybody, and he signed. He did do it. Minta was furious. She lost all trust in him. He simply did not know how to work with a partner, a private personal partner. He didn't understand family life. Chapter 10. Minta felt left out in the cold, and she felt that they should honor their agreement with Hart. She felt it was disloyal. He told her that he'd carried her career, Roscoe, he'd carried her career on his coattails. Minta felt that Anger was behind the scenes urging Roscoe to divorce her. But he had now become the property of Schenck for 5 years. And if you recognize that name, it's because he later went on to deal with Marilyn Monroe, too. Roscoe's new production company was called Comique. And this is sad. He got a carbuncle. It's, like a little infection. And it was so severely painful that the doctor gave him morphine and he became addicted. It was in his leg. The infection in his leg spread. The doctor wanted to amputate his leg. Minta and Hobart Bosworth, his friend, found different doctors with different opinions, and eventually they did save his leg. Then he went on cold turkey to get off the morphine, and they put him in a padded room. It took 2 whole weeks, but he came out clean, free of addiction, but changed. He'd lost more than 80 pounds and he couldn't walk. So he was scheduled to go on a tour for 5 months, and it was supposed to start February 17th. But by February, he gained a little, but he was walking with a crutch. Schenck ordered him to pad his suits. They had special suits made to make him look fatter. And they taped foam rubber to him, too. His tour launched with a formal dinner, and before his grand entrance, his legs buckled under him. He was so weak still, and he couldn't walk. But Anger insisted, you're going out there, you're going to make this appearance. And he and Minta basically carried Roscoe in under an arm, both of them. Even though very sick, Anger forced him on this tour. It was a speaking and appearances tour, and Anger told him, don't bite the hand that feeds you, sick or not. So a lovely individual. Every major city they hit, New York City, he was in horrible pain. He was very sick. But the doctors on the tour kept pumping him full of drugs for the pain. So here he is. He'd gotten clean, but now he's back on the drugs, and he drank because he was in such misery. Anger controlled him like a puppet and tried to cause a divorce. He wanted more control over him. He was a cash cow. Roscoe would send her gifts to Minta, but he never knew how to say he was sorry, and that's what she wanted to hear. They were traveling by train, and they took the train to Boston. They were going to deliver the railroad card to Boston. Roscoe was sick and exhausted, and he went to a hotel, and he went to bed. Zucker, Anger, Lasky, and others had an orgy at a brothel with a bill that was over $1,000, and the girls involved talked. They were called ladies of the evening, and let's just say none of them could vote. Roscoe didn't know. He wasn't there. He was home deathly sick. Hush money was paid by the studios. And Roscoe, the first time he ever heard about it was at his trial 5 years later. So now tooth strikes against him. He sat on Mabel. and caused her head injury, which was not true. It was a lie, but it hung over him, that allegation. Now here's another allegation that he had been in an orgy. He didn't even know about it. But the story became a stigma that haunted him and prevented work for him later. It became a narrative. Zucker denied that he himself was involved, and he never defended Roscoe. This led to the belief that he participated in these sorts of things all the time, and it wasn't true at all. Minta said it certainly wasn't true because he couldn't perform because of his leg. He began staying at the Friars Club, so things were chilly at home. Chapter 11, by the end of March, he started to regain the weight that he had lost, and he was starting to get his strength back and feeling better. He had a final raging fight with Minta, and after 3 days, to cool off, she tried to meet up with him again, and she went to the Friars Club, and they didn't let her in. They told her women were not allowed. But he actually wasn't there anymore. He was staying with Anger and Schenk as they coached him through what to do and say to have a proper divorce and separation. He offered her $500 a week and they could live separately but stay married. She reluctantly agreed, so they didn't get divorced, but they may as well have been. The first Comique, that's the company, two-reeler, was under pre-production. They rented space from the Colony studio owned by Norma Talmadge. This is Schenk's wife. She was a big star. Her sister Constance was a big star. And her sister Natalie was a secretary, but she married Buster Keaton. So everybody was in the movie business. Norma and Constance made a lot of movies in the late 20s and the early 30s. They were very popular. You can go on Turner Classic Movies, and there's a ton of them on there for free. So Roscoe was in a good mood. He had succeeded in negotiating a good deal. He was jubilant about his career. He said, "This was the plum I waited for." He was a close ally and a very close lifelong friend with Buster Keaton. They had done vaudeville together. Roscoe hired Keaton, and in 2 years, Keaton had his own company and was a big international star. Roscoe kept the dog, by the way, in the breakup. So Keaton, when Roscoe hired him, he was known on vaudeville, but he wasn't known in movies at all yet. But in 2 years, thanks to Roscoe giving him the job, he became a gigantic star. Together, Buster and Roscoe made the Butcher Boy movie, the best silent comedy ever is regarded as. It was a huge success. Arbuckle made $1 million in his first year, as you know, on this new contract. This is one of the weird things that happened that came back to haunt him. Somebody doing his business dealings hid some of his income from the IRS. But nobody knows even till today how aware he was. It's kind of felt that he really didn't understand the ins and outs of it, and they think that Anger did it. But it laid the groundwork to an image that was tainted. His reputation was tainted in another way later, and it eventually helped ruin his career. Very sad, but he was a bit gullible in some ways. This is what Buster Keaton said about him. Buster Keaton wrote his own memoir, My Wonderful World of Slapstick. It might actually be an interesting book. And this is what he says about his friend, his close friend. The longer I worked with Roscoe, the more I liked him. He took falls no other man of his weight ever attempted, had a wonderful mind for action gags, which he could devise on the spot. He was a rarity, a truly jolly fat man. He had no meanness, No malice or jealousy in him. Everything seemed to amuse and delight him. He was free with advice and too free in spending and lending money. I could not have found a better-natured man to teach me the movie business, or a more knowledgeable one. We never had an argument. In fact, Roscoe and Buster became the best of friends and quickly earned a reputation in New York and later in Los Angeles as a devilish pair of practical jokers. So in October of 1917, Schenck moved Comique Company back to California. Roscoe found Hollywood changed. The population had increased 150%. Oh my God. Stars ruled. Now they were royalty. They were no longer living in boarding houses and sneered at and scrambling for work. They were now royalty. 40 million Americans went to the movies every week. The movies made more than $25 million a year in profits. And this is, 1917. Many stars had been young and poor and got thrown into fame with a lot of money, and they spent money as fast as they earned it. It was, going through the end of the teens, going through, what I talked about, the Spanish, and then the war. We're approaching the roaring 20s, and Hollywood's focus on that in the movies, the madcap comedies of the very earliest 20s, a bit reflected the culture of Hollywood at the time. They didn't always take place in Hollywood. Often they were in New York City, but I'm thinking of some of the early William Powell movies. I think Constance Talmadge may have been in those, in some of them. Anyway, stage actors began begging for movie roles now. They used to once look down on them and consider them beneath them. Now they wanted them because they were lucrative. Hollywood was still a cowboy town. It had dirt roads, and there was virtually no nightlife. It's really hard to imagine. Roscoe's next film took place in Long Beach. It was called Out West, and Long Beach was far from the main part of LA at the time. It was a big, big success. Minta had stayed in New York. She did not come west with him. Roscoe, talking about Minta, said he felt that a tremendous burden had been lifted. He had complete freedom to work and have fun, and he and Keaton were full of practical jokes, and some of the jokes they perpetrated on people were pretty funny. Roscoe wanted to buy a gravel pit. He actually had a pretty good nose for money. He wanted to buy a gravel pit for an extra income, but anger, who controlled him pretty much, said no. Shortly afterwards, oil was found under the gravel pit. Anyway, November 1918, Buster Keaton got drafted. Roscoe cried when Keaton got drafted. Chapter 12. During the war, the studios were in a major power struggle going on between the top movie moguls. Zucker, he was unscrupulous. He tried to control the industry. He didn't like the growing competition at all. He was very irritated. He often lured stars away, and then there were battles for directors and writers. Hollywood became a gigantic board game with people being shuffled all over the place. Louis B. Mayer was grabbing movie houses, theaters, to dominate the theaters nationally. And this became MGM. And they were in conflict with Lowe's. And Zucker was doing the same thing with his string of theaters. And there was real power if you owned a studio and theaters, because you had a guaranteed place to show them. And they, because they were owned by you, had no choice but to show your movies. It was guaranteed the movies would be watched. He wanted to own Hollywood. His major rival was Nicholas Schenck of Lowe's, Loews. United Artists, so here we go, United Artists, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith. They made their own movies. They distributed their own films, and they also distributed the films they had control over that they made in other studios. Zucker gave $10 million of famous player Lasky's stock. This is what eventually became Paramount, to Otto Kahn to build fancy theaters in any city with a first national cinema. That belonged to another producer. So that's pretty nasty stuff. Keaton came back and he rejoined Arbuckle with Joe Schenck. He was given the offer of his own production unit to star in his own pictures through Metro, renamed the Keaton Studios, with Comique. And so he would be working with Roscoe, Schenck, Anger, and then Keaton. Roscoe had a contract with Schenck, but Zucker made him a huge offer that gave him complete artistic control plus a percentage of the net. And eventually Roscoe signed with Zucker. Big mistake. So I wrote here, this is my little aside here. The book describes the endless negotiations. It's an ugly business. Complicated, interwoven. We don't need to go into it. It'll make your eyes cross. I'm really interested in this time period, and it bored the daylights out of me. It's politics. Big power struggles between Schenck and Zucker, and Roscoe didn't know that it would eventually blow up and really lead to his downfall. It really set the stage for it. Zucker was not happy with how much Roscoe was getting from his contract, and he wanted to put him back, as he said, quote, in his place. So he had a bone to pick with Roscoe. He agreed to get the other studios out of his hair. Ulterior motives. Schenck talked Roscoe into buying Theda Barrow's house for $250,000 cash. Theda Barrow was a big silent star. And I don't think I'm speaking out of school to say that later our friend Denise Siegel recorded some music with her band and a producer who owned the house. He had a recording studio down in the basement in the wine cellar. And she had an encounter with Roscoe Arbuckle's ghost. I think she's talked about it before, but I'm going to try to get her to come and tell the story. It's a great story. So Theda Barrow, famous Theda Barrow. It's just remarkable. So this house, was a beautiful house. If anybody wants to know, it was at 649 West Adams. It was ornately furnished already. The cellar was full of liquor. His parties were the most popular in town because of Prohibition. He had filled this basement with alcohol. He had gold leaf on his bathtubs. He had a butler, a chauffeur, and 6 cars, including a Rolls Royce. To be closer to Long Beach, where they were filming, he bought a second mansion at 1621 East Ocean Boulevard. It's really beautiful. I mean, I remember it from the late 70s, and it was still really a nice place. I can't imagine what it looked like in the teens and 20s. It must have been utterly gorgeous. But anyway, this house that he bought had a tunnel underground that went to the beach. He would ride horses on the beach at night. They had boisterous parties. He had a specially built railroad car for himself called the Elysium. He had lavish custom-built dressing rooms put on location for himself. And let's see what I thought was good here. He had his own little clique, his small circle of friends with whom he partied, pulled pranks, and worked. Members of his group were actresses Viola Dana, Bebe Daniels, and the Talmadge sisters. This is Norma and Constance, and Natalie, but her husband, actor Buster Keaton, now a major star, Al St. John, Roscoe's nephew, Lou Cody, actor, Norman Carey, Buster Collier, Lowell Sherman, directors Fred Fishbach, that name will come back to haunt us, Alf Golding, but the real team was made of Keaton and Arbuckle. Viola Dana has a sad story. Her fiance was a stunt pilot, and she watched him die in a failed stunt. Plane crashed right in front of her. It's very traumatic. Anyway, they would pull crazy pranks. Let's see if I remember this one. Keaton was living with Roscoe while Keaton was house hunting. He's back, you know. And they invited Zucker and celebrities who were all part of the clique. So it was all their friends. And Keaton pretended to be Roscoe's butler. Keaton broke all the protocols. He served the men first, and Zucker didn't notice. Roscoe took Keaton to the kitchen and yelled at him so that the people at the table could hear. Keaton ran to the dining room, yanked the shrimp away from the men, even out of people's hands, and gave it to the women. And then, let's see here. I guess this was too long to read out loud. Then he brought soup bowls and a ladle, but no soup. Then he went into the kitchen, made a big noise, came out dripping wet like he'd spilt the soup on himself. But he didn't say anything. He just took all the soup bowls away. Roscoe pretended to be really angry. He worked himself into a rage, and it almost looked like he was going to be violent. And Zucker reached over to Arbuckle and tried to calm him down by telling him, "It's okay, Roscoe, I don't want soup." And Roscoe said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Zucker, but I think I have an awful problem with my servant." We have the same problems back east too, Roscoe. It's impossible to find intelligent servants, Zucker said. Then was the filling of the water glasses. Keaton carefully poured ice water into each glass until he got to Bibi Daniels. He flirted with her while pouring the water, not looking where he was pouring, missed her glass completely, and dumped ice water on Roscoe. Roscoe screamed, grabbed his hired help by the back of the neck, and hauled him into the kitchen for another loud scolding. Zucker again tried to calm Roscoe down without success. Then Grauman, this is Grauman's Chinese theater, Grauman, their friend, he chimed in that he believed the butler had a drinking problem. Keaton and Arbuckle could barely contain their laughter behind the kitchen door, but they straightened up and they put the last phase into action. Buster carried in a massive turkey, complete with the trimmings, on a silver platter. Arbuckle gave an approving nod and ordered Keaton to carve it in the kitchen. As he entered the kitchen, Buster dropped his service towel, and while he was bending over to pick it up, one of the guests pushed the door open, hitting Buster in the backside, sending him and the turkey crashing into one mess on the floor. Keaton was covered from head to toe with potatoes, parsley, and gravy. He slowly picked up the bird, nonchalantly brushed it off, and made as if he was going to serve it to his guests. Arbuckle's temper could no longer be contained. "I'll kill you, you dumb child without a legitimate father. I'll kill you." By now, Zucker was fit to be tied. He pleaded with Bibi Daniels to control Roscoe before he really did do what he was threatening to do. Daniels opened the kitchen door to let the guests see the full picture of Roscoe crashing a bottle over the poor servant's head. Of course, it was a prop breakaway bottle filled with tea, and the stupid waiter ran out the back door screaming. Arbuckle announced to the group that his chef had prepared a second turkey, and the rest of the dinner proceeded normally. Minutes later, the phone rang. Arbuckle answered it, talked for a few minutes, and announced to the party that Buster Keaton was on the way to have dessert with them. And Zucker's face lit up. "Oh, he's an unforgettable actor. I'm delighted he's coming." When Keaton arrived, Zucker and his associates informed him of the damnedest waiter you did ever see. One man pointed out the close resemblance to Buster. Zucker gave Keaton a hard look and finally caught on to the gag. just thought that was, you could just see it, the most hilarious thing. Dressmaker Vic Levy hoarded vintage wines, and he wouldn't serve it to his guests, only to the very, very socially elite. Keaton, this is a great story. Keaton read in the paper that the King and Queen of Belgium were coming. Levy had helped Belgium in the war. Belgium was in bad shape during the war, and he had done charitable work for them. So he didn't think it was weird when he got a telegram from the King and Queen of Belgium saying they were coming and they wanted to be invited to his house because they wanted to meet stars. They wanted him to have stars over for dinner, and they would join as fans. So this was, a fake telegram. So Roscoe and Keaton hired actors to be the King and Queen of Belgium. Meanwhile, their Levy, who was all excited that the King and Queen were coming to visit, he hired an elite chef, an orchestra, a maid, a waiter, a butler, a chauffeur, and a limo to pick them up at the airport. So Keaton hired fake police bodyguards. Levy paid for special decorations. He had a lavish menu, including all the vintage wine and 100-year-old Napoleon brandy. It was a great evening. He never knew. He wore a tux. He never knew. For Roscoe, the party never stopped. This guy never found out that they pulled this trick on him. It's just hilarious. And they all got to drink the expensive wine. But for Roscoe, this kind of stuff never stopped. He burnt the candle at both ends. He worked hard. He played hard. Keaton and Roscoe went to San Francisco many weekends with their circle of friends, and they did practical jokes there too. One day, Roscoe got shoes dirty, and Keaton got him dirty on purpose, and he held Keaton upside down on his shoulders so that Keaton could walk the dirty shoes across the ceiling and down the wall. And then they just did it to tease the maids, and they left it like that. San Francisco was a popular getaway from Los Angeles. It was more sophisticated, it was quieter, but there was more to do. It was not as frenetic. It was easier to get good alcohol, and it was prettier and calmer than Los Angeles. But San Francisco looked down on the trash from Hollywood, especially movie people. Oh, so beneath them. I remember San Francisco, even in the late 70s, they were still kind of like that. I remember I did some babysitting. I was with a friend visiting, and for the evening I babysat a couple. They were going to the opera, and they were very, Anyway, San Francisco looked down on Los Angeles, and it rankled San Francisco that Los Angeles regarded San Francisco as a party town. San Francisco Examiner, 1921. This is a quote. Rogues and ruffians from Hollywood who disrupt our town, our peaceful town, and then they do it with their ill-mannered ways. They behave like children who had not yet experienced the backhand of a parent. Oh, God. They spent money wildly and expect their conduct to be forgiven with the wave of a dollar bill. There was very vocal ill will between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and the northern city made its position known. Now this is setting the stage. Several local women's groups were discussing ways to keep visitors from Hollywood out of the city without destroying the tourist trade. San Francisco had a problem on its hand, and it was looking for a solution to rid itself of what they called the movie star vermin. With an eye on the governor's mansion, so now political ambition is coming into play. So you have this sort of upper middle class morality taking control, and the governor and mansion going up for a vote. San Francisco District Attorney Matthew Brady promised the people of San Francisco that he would find the solution to the problem being how to keep Angelenos out of their fair city. I'm going to end there because this is the end of the chapter and the plot is thickening. So this is the end of video number 3, and we will begin again here with chapter 13 when I return. Things are going to get really disturbing from now on, so I hope you'll stick around to hear the story. Slán go fóill, slánte.